came to be. Please remember that this issue that we're going to be discussing today of accepting carbon-free attributes was not on the table 2 years ago when we were established as Monterey Bay Community Power. It's an initial attempt now to implement a technical regulation that has developed over a number of years. So it is not surprising that there is disagreement among the attendees today regarding what the board's March 4th action meant. I would like to spend a moment outlining the most important aspects discussed by the board before taking its March 4th action. The board wanted to ensure that Monterey Bay Community Power was not accepting nuclear energy as part of the agency's portfolio. The board also affirmed that the amount of nuclear energy produced by Diablo Canyon would not increase or nor decrease if the attributes were accepted, nor would the timing of the closure of Diablo Canyon be sooner or later than the current plan of 2024-25, excuse me. And lastly, the board spent considerable time discussing the cost savings to Monterey Bay Community Power customers by taking advantage of something they were already paying through the PCIA. But before we get started today, I'd like to go over the meeting format. First of all, Monterey Bay Community staff will present information in its report. It'll then have see if there's any questions from the board. We do have some community members that do advocacy group, Mothers for Peace, that will also have 15 minutes to present information, after which we will go to public comment. And as the clerk of the board has already explained, there are two ways to make live public comment, both written and oral. The Mothers for Peace did ask that 3 people have an opportunity to speak, and so it would be proper to probably have them lead off in making a 2-minute presentation along with the rest of the public. Then we will, the board has already received all written comments made up until 5 p.m. yesterday, Tuesday. Members of the public will have 2 minutes to make their presentations. I think it was the Robert Freeling, David Beidenbaugh, and Bill Powers will be the first 3 in that order, if we could. Then we'll take a public comment for up to 60 minutes, so the board has remaining time to discuss all of the information presented and take action. At the end of the 60 minutes, I'll check to see if there's any remaining speakers who have raised their hand and ask them if their testimony is substantially different from prior remarks made by the public. If the point of your comment was made by a previous speaker, please submit a short written comment, which will be read, which may not be read, excuse me, due to time constraints, but they will become part of the record of this matter. My sincere thanks to the Monterey Bay Community Power staff for all of its work on this difficult and complex issue. I would like to thank also Mothers for Peace and all the other community members who have all weighed in on this issue through email and by attending today. So with that, I think that we could begin the meeting with the presentation by the Monterey Bay Community Power staff. I think that will be Mr. Habashi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to start by setting the record straight that we brought this issue to the Community Advisory Council on February 26th, and that meeting was live in-person public comments. And we got the feedback, and there was generally approval from the Community Advisory Council, although they didn't vote on this issue. We brought this issue again on March 4th with a publicly noticed policy board meeting, and that also was an in-person public meeting comments. And the decision of the board was to direct staff to accept the nuclear carbon-free attributes and to reinvest any avoided cost in local energy developments and resources. The question that was presented back then, as it is presented to you today, is, should Mbcp continue to self-impose 100% carbon-free commitment? And if so, should Mbcp accept the nuclear carbon-free attributes as the most fiscally prudent approach to maintaining 100% carbon-free? And we're going to have another presentation, probably a different approach on the recommendation, and we'll go from there. And I think it's important because it seems a lot of people have different ideas about why we are here for. So let me just be very clear. Our mission is three things. One, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to lower rates for our customers, and to support our local economy. We didn't make those up. Those are straight out of the JPA, and they are listed in that order. Every action that we take every day drive one of those goals forward. And it's most likely, aside from actions that we take in order to benefit the community, as in the UPS program or the program that we put in place for to deal with COVID-19, all other actions that we take will always go through the first check, which is, is this action reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And if that answer is yes, then we'll go on to the next two. Does it lower rates and does it support local economy? Most likely, most actions that we take are taking care of at least two of these, inclusive of the greenhouse gas reduction. Now, we are one of many CCAs, and every organization does it differently. The question of how to achieve the goals tend to be pretty common between all the CCAs, but how to get there can differ from one organization to the other. Our approach is two-pronged approach. One, on the wholesale side, we bring in utility scale, diversified, renewable resources, not most likely, with storage to make sure that we eventually can rid of all the resources that operate on 24 hours a day. And we bring as many of them as we possibly can. And it's not just a good decision for the environment, it is a good decision for the economics, because right now is the most opportune time for us to bring these resources in, because they are getting tax breaks and they are less expensive than others. We actually, in the deals that we have made, and we've made 8 of them so far, and I'm going to go through that later, we will be able to reduce our costs from just operating from year to year on the spot market. We also, in order to reduce greenhouse gas, we focus all of our programs on electrification of transportation, as well as in the building sector, and we're going to go through what we're doing there as well. First, here's a list of the projects that we have signed on. All of them now have been approved, including that last one. It was approved earlier today. By any stretch, Silicon Valley Clean Energy and Monterey Monterey Bay Community Power are the two CCAs that have committed to more renewable resources, more diversified renewable resources than any of the other CCAs. Certainly, even more than I would say than PG&E in the last few years. The total of what we have committed to now is 453 megawatts of renewable resources and another 192 megawatts of storage capacity. All of them are coming online somewhere between the mid of 21 and the end of 23. And I want to emphasize that the fact that we are putting storage with every solar project that we have done, unlike many of the other CCAs, as well as Pacific Gas and Electric, who probably just keep putting solar in there that exacerbate the problem of the duck curve and eventually cause more greenhouse gas emission than it reduces. So what's next on the wholesale side? We turn our attention a little bit to what we need to do locally. We have an MOU with Castle Wind for offshore wind. Once that takes place, and we're estimating or they are estimating that they will be able to bring it in 2026, 2027. We also have an MOU with Photosol, primarily for them to scout our service territory and place some solar plus storage. And they've already informed us that they have found a place where they put sort of reserved an area and which they plan to buy later on to put a project in there that will range anywhere between 150 to 200 megawatt. And we are encouraging them to continue to do so. And as long as we get it at a price that would be reasonably close to where the market is at, maybe a little higher to make up for the fact that we are doing local work, then we will pay that price. We have two initiatives out there. One is a request for offers, again, for renewable resources, wind, solar, geothermal, any renewable project that is being developed. We have that RFO, again, with Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and we expect to get some results in the mid of June. We'll go through that and we'll begin negotiations with the successful proposers. Our expectation is that we will be in contracts, again, more contracts by the end of this year. The 8 projects that I showed you before are good enough to meet about 35% of our total needs. We expect that when this RFO results are done and we have negotiated contracts, that we will be up to about 50% of our total needs. It is quite likely that before 2025, that we will be in contracts for renewable capacity and energy that will meet 100% of our needs of projects that will be 10 years or longer. Another thing that we are engaged in right now is working on long duration storage. That's something it's going to be necessary in the future in order to be able to replace all the natural gas resources that can operate 24 hours, certainly in order to replace Diablo Canyon. On the retail side, we are doing plenty. We have already started a project with the California Energy Commission to put in $7 million worth of level 2 and Cfas chargers in Monterey region, which is Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito. We are working also with the California Energy Commission to bring about $6 million worth of the same thing down in San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara. We've just approved of a program, zero emission school bus program. It's a $1.2 million project that will replace 6 buses, diesel buses, school buses with electric ones, and we hope to expand that project in the years to follow. We have a program for a $1.2 million that we increased now to about 1.35 in order to electrify multi-dwellings, and we've now have reservation for roughly, I believe, for over 400 units that will be installed. Half of them are in San Luis Obispo, and the other half is spread around the rest of our service territory. To bring in about 400 units that would be all electric, no natural gas connection to them. Number of other things that we are working on, I've listed here, and I'm just going to skip so I can shorten this presentation if I can. This is what's next. We're working on it again on transportation, working with the infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, building infrastructure, as well as a number of partnerships for education. One of the biggest obstacles to installing appliances that operate on electric is that the folks that do the installation lack the information, and therefore they normally don't recommend electric appliances to their clients. We want to start an education program to help those folks get over that fear of the new thing, so we can have a proliferation of electric appliances spread out in our neighborhood. All right, now we get into probably a different area. This is all the things that we are doing, all the things that promote and move us towards the things that we need to do. These are just a quick going through the legislation that got us to where we are, that we need to meet, and we'll talk about other things that we self-imposed later on. So first legislation in 2002, AB 117, this is the one that gave CCAs the right to exist. This is a good thing, of course, but on the other side, it established the power charge and difference adjustment, which really is becoming a huge problem for us. And also it gave the IOU the exclusive right to bill. So they actually bill the customers directly for the PCIA, and we need to use them as our billing agent. We have no other venue or option to bill our customers. In 2006, SB 107 mandated, first bill to mandate renewable portfolio standards. And they basically said we want 20% of renewable portfolio by 2010. That, of course, is the one that got the IOUs to spring up and start making commitments to renewable resources so they can be ready by 2010. But in 2006, there wasn't a single CCA out there doing this. That bill also excluded large hydro and designated 3 different classes of renewables. I'm not going to go into that because I always think that renewables are renewables, and as long as they are placed anywhere on the Western system, it's a good thing. For every 1 megawatt hour we get from a renewable resource, it's less 1 megawatt hour less of resource that we get from fossil fuels. But nevertheless, the legislators saw fit to make a distinction between the different type of renewables, favoring a great deal of renewables that will be placed in the state of California. That bill got updated to move the 20% into a 33% by the year 2020. And that happened in 2011. In 2015 came my favorite bill, and I mean that sincerely, SB 350. SB 350 said basically you can't live off short-term renewables that you can buy from the market anymore, because that doesn't add any renewable resources into the portfolio that you have and that the California has. So basically that bill said 65% of all the requirements that you have, whether that be the 20% or the 33%, 60% of that is going to have to come from contracts that are 10 years or longer. Of course, in order to get a contract for 10 years or longer, 99% of the time you actually have to develop a new resource. It's just the way it works. And that basically that law expanded the obligation of renewable resources to 50% by the year 2030. And finally came SB 100 in 2019 that basically increased the obligation to renewables to 60% by 2030, and also said that 100% of resources need to be carbon free by the year 2045. Okay, aside from all the laws and the requirements, I think it's important that we understand how the grid works. And I can assure you most of the people that operate on a daily basis dispatching resources to make sure that supply meets demand every second of every day probably give little attention to who's signed a contract with whom. All what they care about is who is bidding the resources into the ISO system, and they make sure that they bring in all the resources from all the different nodes that will ensure 100% that the demand is being met and being met reliably. In general, this is what they do every day. They bring in the resources that are what we call must-take, resources that always get dispatched first because they are either regulatory mandated that they get dispatched first, or because the recovery cost of those resources is guaranteed to the ones that own these resources. So generally, all the resources that the investor-owned utilities run first into the dispatch of the system, the California system, is the nuclear power, geothermal power. They're always going to run first. There's something called must-run hydro, which basically minimum releases of water that's going to also run first. Biofuel that are regulatory mandated, they will run, follow that. There will be plenty of room for solar and wind to come in. And finally, thermal resources, and here specifically I'm speaking of resources that run on natural gas. Those will be coming in last to fill in the gaps. And the reason they are running last, because they are the only resources that have that are expensive to run, because you actually have to buy the natural gas in order to run these resources. So there's a variable component associated with them. You're not going to dispatch these resources unless the price that you're going to get or what you will get from the ISO is higher from the cost of running these resources. In some cases, we have curtailment of solar and wind. These are intermittent resources. And so if there's an imbalance that the ISO will foresee or predict going between supply and demand, they will reduce the supply to make sure that we don't supply any more than what the demand demands. And so they will curtail solar and wind. These will be the first one to be curtailed. Of course, during the day nowadays, because we have so much solar, they ramp down a lot of the thermal resources, and then they ramp it up again at the end of the day. And that can be very costly, not just from a dollar standpoint, but also from an environmental standpoint, because thermal resources operate very much like the motor. If you have one of those cars yet, most of the greenhouse gas really is emitted during the ramping up, the speeding up, and the slowing down. So what we are likely to see is natural gas will continue to operate until we have enough long duration storage committed and viable, commercially viable. And finally, we know that Diablo Canyon will be decommissioned in 24, 25. All right. So what is it that we do in order to satisfy, one, to meet the demand of the customer, and also to satisfy certain requirements that we either impose on us by the state or that we have self-imposed? We buy the electricity products separately, and it is very much like an IKEA piece of furniture. It doesn't come assembled. We sort of have to assemble it with the energy that comes in on an hourly basis or hedged on an hourly basis. Renewable portfolio standards that we buy in bulk for the entire year. And we don't buy the second or the third type. We don't want to deal with that headache, even though we pay for that. But because many of you already expressed interest in not buying unbundled credits, we just don't buy it. We also buy these what are called eligible renewable resources. That's it. That's what's mandated. That's what we need to do. Meet our demand and meet the requirements that the state has of us. We have other things that we have requirements that we have self-imposed, namely to go into 100% carbon free. That's what we decided when we first started. And now when we made that decision, I want to be very clear as to why we made it. It's not to have a PCL or portfolio content or portfolio. I forgot the title of it. I think it's portfolio resource content, which is a postcard that we send to our customers every year to say, this is where the power is coming from. This is not our purpose for buying or recommending to buy attributes associated with carbon free. The reason we have made these recommendations, at least, and I admit it may be a fault on my part, I have estimated or assumed that all of our cities and counties are spending money in order to reduce greenhouse gases associated with electric generation within the cities and counties. This is something that's required by AB 32, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that one. That basically said we need to reduce greenhouse gas in every city and every county in California And I think the latest revision of it says that by the year 2030, we need to reduce the emissions that are now happening in 2020 by 40%. I've made that assumption incorrectly. As I understand it, I don't believe any of our membership is now spending money on that specifically in order to reduce greenhouse gas associated with the electric utility generation. If there were, then for us to go out and buy these attributes would have been good, because it kind of reduces your obligation to buy greenhouse gas on your own, or do the things that will help reduce greenhouse gas in that area. And finally, we buy resource. And by the way, this renewable credits all comes from large hydro, because large hydros don't qualify as a renewable resource in accordance with state law. So when we, by the way, when we first started back in 2018, we were the second CCA to do it. The first was Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which I started that process. When we started buying these attributes, they were cheap. They were coming at $1.25 at megawatt hour. And so in order for us to be 100% carbon free, we were looking at maybe spending $1.5 million total to get there. Not only us, but a number of others started getting on the act. Only 3 CCAs that have committed to 100% carbon free: Silicon Valley Clean Energy, us, and Peninsula Clean Energy. One of them already, by the way, have accepted the nuclear power allocation, and the other one did not. And last thing that the other product that we have to buy is called resource adequacy. We are required to buy that. This is an insurance policy to be sure that all those who build resources in the past and build in the future get a contribution to the fixed cost. It's not an energy product. It's not a renewable product. It's nothing product. It's just simply an insurance policy. And we buy it from any resource that has RA value. There's a lot of, I've received at least a couple of emails saying they don't understand this table, so I'm going to go through it. And please, I didn't include the 3 lines or the 4 lines at the end that talks about the dollars and cents, but it's important to go through it, and I'm going to try to do that as quickly as possible. The first line in that table represents the total demand that Monterey Bay has. That is really 2 pieces. One is what comes from the area that PG&E is serving, and the other one comes from one that's Southern California Edison is serving. So that basically the 1A and 1B, if you add them together, that will result in 1. A portion of that resource we are required to meet using renewable portfolio standards, which, by the way, are also carbon free. That portion is increasing from 33% this year to 46.7 in 2025. And that's what the law requires. We need to keep increasing it by a factor of a couple of percentage points. So basically, by 2025, roughly half of our energy will be, or half of our carbon-free attributes will also be met by the renewable portfolio standards that we are required to install. The next line basically says, this is the RPS mandated in megawatt hours. You subtract that from the total. You come up with a line, which is line item number 4, that says this is the amount of energy that we need to buy credits, renewable credits, in order to couple it with that energy in order to get us into 100% carbon free, if you will. Some of that we already bought, and some we're going to be getting from PG&E's large hydro attributes. So that's line number 5. Basically, in the next 3 years, we have bought certain amounts, and if you add to it the 380 gigawatt hours that we're going to get from PG&E for free, then you end up with that line. Year by year, this is the amount that we have already on the record, which get us to the balance, how much additional we need to buy in order to get to 100% carbon free, and which is in line number 6. Line number 7 basically expresses that same number in percent of our total load. Now we get into line number 8, 9, and 10. Those describe the energy that will be generated by the nuclear power plant, or estimated to be generated by the nuclear power plant between now and 2005. And we get a percent of that based on our load relative to the total load of PG&E, which give us an allocation that you see under line 10 of carbon-free attributes resulting from the generation of the nuclear power plant. And you see that again in line number 10. If you take line number 10 and you subtract that from line number 6, you end up with line 11, which basically tell you how much we need to buy in order to get to 100% carbon free after we include both the large hydro and the nuclear attributes coming from PG&E. The first 2 years, as you see here, which is 2020 and 2021, we actually have a surplus. The surplus that we had in 2020 was actually larger than that. It was 500 gigawatt hours, but we already moved 300 gigawatt hours to the market, and we actually did that to PCE sometime before they got their staff report to their board saying that the short position has became considerably smaller. Never mind item number 12 doesn't add much to the discussion. And the last 2 lines basically say this is the boundary of what we think the price of these attributes have gone up to. Remember, I've told you earlier that when we bought, or we got into it, we bought the carbon-free attributes at about $1.25. The last 2 times we went out, we got $6 bid for a small quantity, which we didn't take. And the second time we went out, we got nothing. Nobody would bid into or make an offer of any kind. The 350 really is the price that we sold PCE at. So I don't know if that's indicative enough of where the market is at if I were to go out again tomorrow. But at least we'll put these 2 numbers as the boundaries of what the price is going to be at if we were to go out again. I think it's important to not underestimate the problem that we're dealing with here with the PCE. I mean with the PCIA, the Power Charge Indifference Adjustment. And we put a table on here to kind of explain what the CPUC have approved between 2016 and 2020. You can see here the first line basically say this is the money that PG&E needed to recover from their customers. Then if you go down to the second line, this is the amount of money that they needed to recover from CCAs. So from their customers, they needed to recover $4,275,000,000. And from us, the CCAs, all of the CCAs, as well as the DA customers, they needed to recover $136 million. Basically, our share, I guess, or relatively speaking, our cost relative to theirs was about 2.5%. Ramp it all the way up to today, and the picture flips a great deal. Now they're going to be recovering from their own customers, which are about 50% maybe of the total number of customers that they used to have. They want to recover $1.8 billion, and they're going to recover from us $3 billion. When I first started at Silicon Valley in 2016, the power charge and difference adjustment was about 1 cent per kilowatt hour. And we were screaming about it, believing that it's huge relative to what we are charging. Today, we are hovering around or getting very close to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. We are getting very close to be charging just as much as they are charging for the PCIA. Of course, we are providing the power. They are providing, I'm not too sure what. But that's the problem that we face in the PCIA today. Let's talk about the premium for exceeding compliance. If we were to flat out comply, and this is the picture that we shared with you last time around. If we said that we're going to just comply with what the law says, we're going to meet our minimum requirement of renewable portfolio standard, and nothing more, nothing less, using the 3 types just like we are allowed to do by law. Then we're looking at a cost. This cost, by the way, is 2021. So we're not talking about 2020 anymore. That's behind us. This is the cost for 2021. We're looking at a cost of about $288 million. Just to go from type 1, 2, 3 to only type 1 to meet the obligations that we have to the state, we end up spending about $4.8 million. If we are to go to 100% carbon free without taking the allocation from PG&E associated with the generation coming from nuclear power, then we are looking for another $15 million to add to that. Get us basically to a total premium of about $19 million. If we don't take the nuclear allocation, and again, I'm talking 2021, not 2020, then that premium drops to 13.7. Now, this assumes that the cost for the premium is about $650. If that is less, or $350, then that premium that we are talking about is now about maybe $2.5, $3 million. So that's the premium that we pay. And I can tell you, I'm sitting here and I can tell you for certain that I don't know what that does to meet the 3 goals that I've shared with you early. I don't know if any change that happens, any reduction in greenhouse gas, any increase in electrification that happened as a result of coming up with $19 million. I don't have anything to show for it, except that we can have the bragging right that we are not using type 2 or type 3 renewables, and we are not, and that we are 100% carbon free.
Okay, Mr. Hafai, how much longer do you have to go?
That's it. My last slide, Mr.
Okay.
Chair.
Okay, good.
This is the 4 options that I've shared with you. Basically, accept or confirm the decisions that you made. And if you do that, we are looking at the amount of money that we're going to spend in order to get to 100% carbon free. After you take the carbon free that you get from PG&E, and after you account for the ones that we already bought, over the next 5 years, we're looking at $20 to $37 million that we're going to spend on reaching 100% carbon free. If you would reject the nuclear attributes and also suspend the 100% carbon free until 2025, which I can assure you by 2025, we're going to be already in enough contracts to get us to that 100% carbon free without having to struggle buying these attributes and not having anything to show for it. The cost to you will be 0. If we reject the nuclear attributes and basically say we're not gonna buy any additional attributes this year, we're short 8%. We're just gonna not buy that. Then we can come back and reassess that decision next year. Then the numbers that I put in there, that's really the cost, assuming that you go back next year to 100% carbon free again. If you decided next year that, well, this makes sense, we're going to stay at no nuclear, but also we're not going to try for the 100%. If you continue that next year and the year after and the year after, then you're back into option number 2. Basically, you're not spending any money on these attributes anymore. And finally, if you decide to reject the nuclear CFA and stay at 100% carbon free for the duration, then you'll be looking at additional costs of $35 to $65 million. That's my presentation, Mr. Chairman. I'll stop here.
I'd like to see if there's anybody that has a question on some of those detailed specifics before we get to hearing the presentation by Mothers for Peace. Anybody have a question from the board?
Hello, Chair McPherson, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Mayor Harman, and I don't have a question yet, but I wanted to start the meeting actually by just saying how much I appreciate you, Chair McPherson, and all my colleagues here for your willingness to re-agendize this item. It is incredibly important to the people, I'm sure outside my community, but having the last operating nuclear power plant here in San Luis Obispo, this is a crucial issue for folks. So I just wanted to start by sharing gratitude to the chair and all of the all my colleagues for being willing to have this conversation today.
Thank you. Is there any other director that would like to or have a question for Mr. Hibashi before we hear the presentation from Mothers for Peace?
Chair, I have a few questions.
Yes, sir. Mr. Dillis?
Yeah. First, I'm wondering if we did reject nuclear and maintain the 100% carbon-free commitment, would our rates still be less than PG&E in our best estimates?
Very good question. I can tell you that we have done the numbers for next year, just for 2021, because as you probably know, we are now doing cost of service analysis, and we're going to use that in order to determine our rates. Our first shot at it so far got us to, we've looked at it just from a total revenue requirement basis, and it looks like our revenue requirement is going to be about 302. I'm almost certain it's going to be that, about $302 million. We did the numbers again using PG&E's rates as they are, without any discount from those rates, and found that the numbers are going to be 297, I believe. Basically, what I'm saying is we are likely to pull $5 million out of the rate stabilization fund just to stay even with PG&E for next year.
If that decision were made to not accept nuclear?
Actually, that probably adds another $800,000 to it.
Oh, okay.
For 2020, actually for 2021, I apologize. It's actually going to add closer to $2 million to that shortfall.
Okay. And a second question is, again, if we did not accept nuclear, and we changed our policy to be something less than 100% carbon free, and I know you had 92% here. You mentioned 80%, I think, in the March 4th staff report. Can you guesstimate what level of carbon free that we could set that would basically keep us even with what we've already decided to do financially? In other words, we already decided to accept nuclear and to keep the 100%. Is there a way of easily translating that into the level of carbon free that would keep us at that financial benchmark?
Yeah, if you want to make the decision just to take you for the next 5 years, I would say if you set the carbon free at 80%, 75 to 80%, that will can pretty much make you be comfortable of rejecting the nuclear power attributes without having to impact our operation. Well, obviously, anything that we pay towards this carbon-free does cost money, but at least the equivalent of taking the free carbon-free attributes from the nuclear power is about 20% of our load.
Okay, thank you. My third question, do I understand that these are actual annual decisions that that we would make relative to whether or not to accept nuclear? I know you're talking about a 5-year period, and I see you break it down year by year. Is it an annual decision?
That's correct, yes. It's an annual confirmation. The first one we already got from PG&E for the remainder of 2020. So we're not getting full allocation for the entire year of 2020. We're only getting enough to cover the last 7 months of the year.
Okay, and you showed us that actually we're looking at credits, I think, for the for what 1920 and 2021, which makes it look like we may not, am I understanding right, we may not have much of an incremental cost if we did not accept the nuclear attributes just for this year and next, and if we maintain that 100% carbon at least through 21. Is that a fair statement? It'd be a small cost?
The incremental cost for this year will be $800,000 roughly, assuming that we can get our short position at the lowest price, if I can find it. I want to be clear that most of these attributes are sold a year ahead, sometimes 2 years ahead of time, knowing what the water year is going to look like. All those who have these attributes available, they move them to the market. And once you're in the operating year, it's very difficult to have anybody that will be selling you this. There will be, of course, people that will come to you saying, sure, yeah, I'll sell it to you for twice as much as I got it for. And they're going to figure out a way to, to find it. But it's doubtful that I can get it at the cheap price. If we can get it at the cheap price this year, it would be $800,000 relative to our ability to move the surplus that you are seeing that table that I showed you, which would be plus $700,000. So effectively, you will forgo about $1.5 million just for 2020. For 2021, you're looking at about $3 million that you're giving up, assuming that we are still working at the lower price of $350 a megawatt hour.
Okay. Thank you. My next question, I've heard the term the unspecified source, and I just wanted to understand that a little bit. Could you talk a little bit what that means when we label what our power is? What does that mean?
100% of the electricity that goes to serve all of our customers is unspecified. It's just electricity. Moves into the ISO from different generation facilities going into different nodes. It travels in the passive least resistance, and the ISO sell it to us and balances the dollars and the cents on weekly basis. All the power that the ISO buys, they don't buy any colorful electricity. It all comes in as electricity, it's sold as electricity, all of it as unspecified. It becomes more specified when we begin to buy the credits that we are speaking of. So we go out and lock in a whole bunch of credits from renewable portfolio resources like such as solar and wind and others, and buy carbon-free credits from large hydro. Because those who sell power to the California ISO, they sell the energy, they sell the electricity, they get the price or their cost from the ISO, but they also hold on if they happen to generate from a resource that could be construed or at least defined as renewable resource or eligible or uneligible. They hold on to a piece of paper that says, I got a credit here for either carbon-free or renewable resource, and they sell that credit for the entire year. They don't sell it hour by hour. They just basically say to us, I got so many gigawatt hours of renewable resource for this at this price. Do you want it? So we buy the energy on an hourly basis. We buy the attributes on annual basis, and that's how we get to, at the end of the year, say, well, now that power is not specified. It's specified. Now we got, because we colored it with solar, we colored it with wind, we colored it with some credit that gave it some sort of an adder, if you will. So that's how that works. If the credits that we buy don't equal the amount of power that was sold to the customer for the year, if we buy credits only for 80% of our total load, or equal 80% of our total load, the other 20% is now unspecified. Does that explain that?
Yeah, thank you. My last question. I know that Diablo Canyon is supposed to go away. CPUC has ordered that it be shut down by 2025. And I'm just wondering if you can imagine any reasonable scenario under which it would close down sooner. Is it, I know you've told us before that in March that basically is going to keep right on producing until that point, and it'll get used one way or the other. But can you foresee any scenario under which it would not last until 2025?
Natural disaster, that's the only thing. I do not foresee anything coming from the legislative branch or from the regulatory agencies, or definitely not from PG&E, that would want to force them to stop it early. Because the bottom line is this: if they don't produce, they don't get paid. They rate base this power plant, all of the cost of it, fixed operating, variable operating. It doesn't matter what the cost is. Anything that's associated with this power plant, all of it, 100% of it is rate based. If they don't operate it, if they operate it at a lower scale, then they can't rate basis. They can't recover that money from the customer. It will have to come out of the pockets of the shareholders.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Good questions. Any other director have a question of Mr. Hibashi? Okay. At this point, I think Mr. Hirsch, representing Mothers for Peace, was going to make a presentation.
Chair, can I ask one question?
Oh, excuse me, Mayor Cummings.
Thank you. A question related to the production of power. I'm just kind of curious whether if we were to agree to use this power, if we were to not agree, would this influence the production of power at the plant itself?
It would not, I can assure you, it will not influence the production of that power. The power will continue to produce sold to the ISO. We are not defining any dollar associated with it. It's zero. We actually don't even know how much power we're going to get. We're just get a percent of the production of that power, or the production. We get a percent credit of the production of that power. So we don't know the quantity. There's no price, and we are not going to be even taking credit. We're not going to be taking possession of it. We don't have a title to that power when we buy it. We just have the ability to report to governmental agencies that we got more carbon-free energy.
And then my next question, to follow up with that, when Diablo Canyon is shut down in 2025, I guess, what would actually kind of fill the space of those credits that we were getting from Diablo Canyon?
It's a very good question. And I can share with you a study that I saw earlier this morning. And that one came from Germany. Basically, because they decided a few years back to shut all the nuclear power plants. And as a result, they are now seeing a lot of natural gas-fired generation that's coming in to replace it. So while they definitely reducing the huge risk that comes from having a nuclear power plant around, they saw a spike of about 8% increase in greenhouse gases. As it relates to Diablo Canyon, my guess, because between now and 2025, I don't think we're going to be able to build enough renewable resources because you require a whole lot of storage in order to operate these resources at night. Most likely there will be a few natural gas facilities that will be either added or coming out of retirement, so to speak.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Chair McPherson, your mic may still be muted.
Vice Chair McShane, I don't see his name on the list, so you might have gotten dropped.
Thank you. One moment.
I'm here if you need me.
Oh, I mean, Chair McPherson, I don't see him in the list of panelists, so I think his connection might have been lost.
Can we get the vice chair to get us moving?
We need to take public comment at this point, right? And we have the presentation. So should we resume the presentation from the Mothers for Peace?
Vice Chair McShane, yeah,
I'm back.
Okay,
Excuse me.
cool.
Chair McPherson, it doesn't appear that there's additional questions from the board. Do you want to start the presentation now from?
Were there? Oh, I'm sorry. Were there other questions from the board? No. Okay. Let's go, Mr. Hirsch, with his presentation then.
First of all, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me, and I'm going to have to share a screen. So let's make sure this works before I start also. Okay, please. And we are looking for. Can you tell me whether you can see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, I'll start now. Thank you. My name is Dan Hirsch. I retired 3 years ago as the director of the program on environmental and nuclear policy at UC Santa Cruz. By way of background, before that, I was a energy and environment fellow at the Federation of American Scientists in Washington. Before that, I was the director of the program on nuclear policy at UC Santa Cruz. Before that, I taught at UCLA, energy, alternatives, and public policy. Graduate of Harvard, and by way of full disclosure, I'm a constituent of Supervisor McPherson. I've been asked by a number of people who are concerned with the decisions that have been made to present to you some of the concerns that they have. And to do that, I want to remind you of the decision you made last week about your tagline, which is that you folks are focused on clean energy and on local control, often referred to as community choice. Your website talks over and over again about clean energy, always with the image of windmills and solar collectors. Clean energy, clean energy, clean energy, as you see here. And the question before us is whether nuclear power is clean energy. I am stuck for a second. Yeah, here. Mbcp has also repeatedly pledged that it would be nuclear free. For example, here is something from 2018. Mbcp procures electricity from carbon-free sources such as solar, wind, and hydro. Mbcp does not use power generated from nuclear sources. Staff practice has been not to acquire energy that's generated from nuclear or coal. This practice has been shared with new jurisdictions from San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara, and some have partially based their decision to join Mbcp on the assumption that we'll continue that practice. So the controversy before us today is that Mbcp is being asked nonetheless to take nuclear so-called attributes from PG&E. There is no such thing as an energy attribute separate from the energy itself. It's a fiction designed to be able to tell the consumer they're getting carbon-free energy when in fact some of the energy actually being purchased comes from system power. And one of you was asking that question about the specified power. And that means you're actually purchasing power that includes natural gas and some coal. To cover that, you're buying these attributes to make it not seem that is happening. It's like the indulgences sold hundreds of years ago by the church for sins, a practice which led to the Protestant Reformation. You could sin all you wanted so long as you bought an indulgence. If I offered to give you a dog's attributes, constant barking, running after skunks and bringing the stench into the house, and fleas, but retain title to the dog, you wouldn't think it is a great deal. But that is in essence what you are being asked to do today. Here is a statement from the fact sheet issued, and it's really an important thing for you to focus on, that if you accepted the nuclear allocation, the power content label that you would send out to your consumers every year would have to include up to 20% nuclear power. This is your current power content label. And this is what you're being asked to change it to. You should look hard at that red area with the atom, the 20% nuclear, which is what you would have to now declare to your consumers. So yes, you're getting power, you're declaring it to be 20% of your power mix. So what are the attributes of nuclear power, and is it clean power consistent with your mission? The attributes of nuclear power are radioactive waste that's dangerous for tens of thousands of generations, proliferation of nuclear weapons, risk of meltdown and widespread contamination, risk of terrorist attack releasing large amounts of radioactivity, environmental justice impacts from pollution from uranium mining and milling, largely in Native American lands. It diverts money from renewables. And here's the one partially positive attribute. There are lower carbon emissions than fossil fuels, roughly 1/6 of natural gas, but it is higher than renewables, roughly 6 times higher than wind. It's not carbon-free, but it's lower in carbon than some of the other sources, the fossil fuels. So the first point, it's not clean. There are immensely long-lived and toxic nuclear wastes that are produced. The nuclear power plants produce these very long-lived wastes. You see the spent fuel in the upper left-hand corner. It was so irradiated that if we had a spent fuel rod that had been recently removed from a reactor and it was in any of the rooms where you are, you would have gotten a lethal dose by now. We get 50 years of power, but 500,000 years of radioactive waste. You see that dot there? That's proportionally how long the United States has existed as a country. This is how long we have had human civilization. And this is the amount of time the nuclear waste remains radioactive, 500,000 years. Other waste than the spent fuel is put into often unlined trenches where almost every one of these that they have built has leaked in just a few years. Here's the spent fuel at San Onofre, which is just 100 feet from the ocean and about 1.5 feet above groundwater when we're having rising sea level. Radiation causes cancers, leukemias, genetic defects in offspring, and various other health effects. Second reason it's not clean, and this is what has driven most of my life. Nuclear power proliferates nuclear weapons. Every nuclear power plant, for example, Diablo, that has 2 reactors, produces a large amount of plutonium. At Diablo, 0.5 ton a year. 1/1,000,000th of an ounce of inhaled will cause cancer with virtual 100% certainty. That amount of plutonium is enough each year for 250 nuclear bombs, each more powerful than the one that destroyed Hiroshima. Next reason it's not clean. Nuclear power plants can suffer meltdowns, releasing vast amounts of radioactivity and rendering large areas uninhabitable for generations. The first reactor to produce electricity for the commercial grid was at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory on the Los Angeles-Ventura County line. It was also the first to suffer a partial meltdown, which wasn't known until my students, when I taught at UCLA, discovered documents showing the photographs of the melted fuel from the reactor in the Los Angeles area. It wasn't the last. 3 Mile Island occurred. It got within half an hour of a complete meltdown. And then Chernobyl, which had a full meltdown and a fire, releasing immense amounts of radioactivity throughout much of Europe. And then Fukushima, absolutely incomprehensible. Not just 1 meltdown, not just 2, but 3 reactors melting down, and 3 reactors, one after another, suffering a hydrogen explosion, completely destroying the reactors. And this photograph says it all. Is it clean? Not when you have to run a Geiger counter against a terrified child to see if the child has been contaminated. The founder of Friends of the Earth, David Brower, once defined a nuclear reactor as a complex technological device for locating earthquake faults in California. And that's because every time we built a reactor, we found a bunch of earthquake faults thereafter near it, causing great safety problems. Diablo Canyon at the heart of the Central Coast, and you are now going to be the Central Coast Community Energy. At the heart of the Central Coast, Diablo Canyon, PG&E claimed when it was trying to get a license that there were no active earthquake faults within 30 kilometers. After getting partially built, they found the Hosgri fault within 4 kilometers of the reactor. Then the San Luis Bay fault, then the Los Osos fault. Finally, in 2007, the Shoreline fault coming within 600 meters of the reactors. Several of these faults are interlinked, so that the amount of ground motion possible at the reactor far exceeds what the reactor was designed to withstand. Now, the second part of MBCP's mission is community choice. That means that the community decides the power content rather than has it imposed on them. This was one of the great selling points. You aren't PG&E. There is community choice. There's local control. Among the many hats I've worn in my life is for a number of years, I was Aldous Huxley's literary executor for his literary works. And one of the works that people have never read, was most important that he has written, is called Ends and Means. And Aldous said, good ends can be achieved only by the employment of the appropriate means. The end cannot justify the means for the simple and obvious reason that the means employed determine the nature of the ends produced. That's a simple way of saying what you have said as your central mission. Your end is clean power, and your means are community choice. And you can't have a good end unless you have a good means, and that means the community choice has to be real. You were told by the staff in its report that the decision made in March was conducted in compliance with public notice requirements and with the full opportunity for public input. But in fact, this is what the agenda item was. You will notice that nuclear was not even mentioned. No one was on notice that that was going to be considered. There was no effort by the staff to reach out to groups like the Mothers for Peace, who have been active for half a century on this issue, and bring them into the loop and discuss this and try to reach a consensus before the issue was put to the board. There was no notification to them that the matter was coming, no opportunity for equal time or even to be able to rebut at all. In fact, there were comments at the March meeting that many MBCP consumers would be very upset with the proposal to accept the nuclear offer from PG&E, and so the board should approve it before the public learned of the proposal, and then mount a PR campaign to sell the decision after the fact. That's why we're here today, in fact, because the process got so messed up. Once the decision became public and there was substantial public dismay, repeated requests by Mothers for Peace for reconsideration to be placed on the agenda of the CAC and the policy board received no response at all. They had to ask again, no response, had to ask again, no response. Even their request for written explanation of the changing staff cost estimates, because you were told initially you would save $6 million when you voted for it. Now you're told it's $3 million. Now it might be $1.5 million for this year. And then a fancy table with a whole bunch of numbers, the basis of which has never been disclosed in writing. The mothers asked for it. You haven't had it in writing in advance of this meeting, so you can't make an informed decision. I can't rebut it because I haven't seen the explanation for it. The staff report said that it would be explained orally. My father would have said, this is no way to run a railroad, nor is it a way to run an entity that was supposed to be an alternative to PG&E based on community choice. This needs to be fixed by reversing the decision and taking time for consultation with stakeholders and attempting to reach an honorable consensus consistent with MBCP's mission. And I, as a side note, would say, I think that should be large enough to deal with the big elephant in the room, which is the fact that you're not carbon-free, but you're buying for millions of dollars, so-called attributes to cover that fact, money that could be used in your districts for real renewable programs. There are 7 CCAs that have rejected the nuclear offer. There are 3 that have said yes. We don't have information about King City. Why shouldn't you be in that majority? Should it be in the green group, in the group that represents the majority of the consumers of energy under CCAs? There is a substantial reputational cost to MBCP if the nuclear offer is accepted under these circumstances. The goodwill asset could be significantly hit. You know, accountants will actually quantify goodwill as an asset for an entity, and for no entity other than MBCP could it be more important. Your consumer confidence in you is absolutely critical. That's what you've been selling. Consumers, if they feel that MBCP and your new name CCCE, if they feel that you're a little different than PG&E, a lot of them might opt out, and that's a real cost. Localities that are considering MBCP could choose not to, and you know that San Luis Obispo 10 days from now is supposed to vote on whether to join you. And localities that join based on the representation that MBCP doesn't take nuclear might reconsider. Those are very large costs and have not been included in the presentation to you of what the costs are of these decisions. Already there's been press coverage questioning MBCP's brand, its claims. Here is a cartoon that ran in a local paper that shows MBCP as a shell. On the outside, green with sun, solar, and on the inside, dirty nuclear. And if you don't reverse and really try to build some consensus here that is actually on safe energy, this could really explode. So remember again, this is what you now disclose to your consumers. And this is what you're being asked to approve instead. I think if you stare hard at that and remember that your mission is safe energy and what the impacts would be nationally if the consumer choice aggregate on the most environmentally minded area of the country, the Central Coast, were to declare nuclear safe, nuclear clean, there would be terrible ramifications for the efforts for clean energy and for renewables. I want to end with this, if I may. You remember the film A Man for All Seasons about Sir Thomas More, who's on trial for his life for opposing the king's divorce. And he is then has false testimony against him by this guy, Richie Rich. And this is what he says.
There is one question I would like to ask the witness. That's a chain of officer writing. Yes, sir? The Red Dragon. What's this?
Sir Richard is appointed Attorney General for Wales.
For Wales. Why, Richard, it profits a man nothing to give his soul for the whole world. But for Wales.
The soul of MBCP is clean power, community choice. Our message to you is don't sell that soul. 50 cents a month, the equivalent of what the savings are projected, is simply not worth it. And remember, at the end of the day, you're being asked to prove this, and that would undermine the central mission of MBCP. I'd be pleased to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
We could have some, any questions from the members of the board? I don't see anybody. Anybody raise their hand or want to ask a question? Let's follow up with, there was three other gentlemen I think that you wanted to have, or Mothers for Peace wanted to address us. If they could make a 2-minute presentation, that'd be great.
Robert Freeling, you're ready to present. Thank you.
Mr. Freeling, if you're there, can you check that your mic is not muted?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, good. All right. Thanks. Yeah, I was talking there. Nothing happened. So thank you for having this meeting. And I wanted to say, first of all, that a lot of the things that I was going to say in this 2 minutes was already raised by Mr. Habashi. Essentially, his slide, which said that this is optics. So the question is, are you going to achieve any of the goals of your mission? And essentially, he has conceded that you're not. The 3 tests. Are you reducing greenhouse gas emissions? He said this plant's going to run whether or not you take them. This plant already exists. It's not new renewables being built. It's nothing to do with your mission. It doesn't reduce greenhouse gas emissions for you to take the carbon allocation. It doesn't increase renewable energy. It might provide some financial benefit. That's probably the only argument that could be made for it, which is itself a big question. When you were sold this back in February and March, what you were told is that it would save $5.5 to $6 million. That was subsequently shaved to possibly $3 million next year, maybe $1.5 million this year. I heard one figure from your staff saying that it could be about $800,000. So somewhere between 75 to 85, maybe 90% could be nothing. I mean, he said that he looked on the market, didn't pay any price for it. Whether anybody buys it at all depends on whether it's worth something. And that depends on whether it complies with any regulation. And it may or may not next year. We don't know. What we do know is that the purpose is not to reduce carbon emissions. And it may or may not save you any money. Whatever money it does save, the highest figure was 1% on the utility bill, which is about $600 million a year for your customers, the total amount they paid, not your budget, but what the customer sees. The latest figure now is a small fraction of a percent, not enough to cause any customer to leave or even notice on their bill, certainly not to show up in droves at meetings or draw activist attention. But this will and is drawing a lot of attention. So the third purpose was to provide local community benefits. And buying attributes or receiving attributes or giving them free from Diablo Canyon does not provide any community benefit for you at all, with the possible exception that you might get, $800,000 this year, maybe, or nothing. That's assuming they can even be sold. So, and the fact is that the same benefits that are claimed that you could get local development from this money, say, could be gotten in many, many other ways. There are lots of public programs with millions, tens of millions, or hundreds of millions of dollars funded by the state that you could be going after to fund local programs. The CPUC has a budget of about $1 billion a year for energy efficiency programs. There's $200 million that is about to be given away in a proceeding I was involved with for innovation grants for home electrification. There's $80 million a year for disadvantaged community rooftop solar. These are orders of magnitude amounts of money. The self-generation incentive program gives about $130 million a year in grants away for energy storage and local renewable energy. And this is just a sample. So if you need $800,000 or $1.5 million or whatever amount of money you might have gotten from this, there are many other ways to get that funding than to spoil your brand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. David Bidenbaugh, is that the next person to speak?
Yes, Dale Bidenbaugh, we're ready for you to speak. Thank you.
And if you're there, sir, if you can unmute your microphone.
Okay, now am I there?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon to members of the board and members of the public. My name is Dale Bidenbaugh, as we have since previously indicated. I'm a 30-plus year resident of Santa Cruz County, Aptos specifically. I have been a customer of Monterey Bay Power since its inception several years ago. And I also own a generating station, which happens to reside on the roof of my house here in Aptos. And I think it's probably operating at peak power right now because it's a beautiful day. I have been in the electric utility industry in various different hats since my graduation from engineering school in 1953, with the possible exception of 2 years off for military duty. I started out in the nuclear business in 1958 when I was assigned to the installation, construction, and startup of the Dresden Unit 1 nuclear power station southwest of Chicago. And I worked there for for several years, getting everything running. I was very excited about being involved in this new energy field. And I think if you don't look at the broad aspects of nuclear power, it still is very exciting. But as Dan Hirsch pointed out, you have to look at all of the stuff that goes along with nuclear power. You have to look at the mining, the energy use, and enriching the uranium, and you have to look at the possible effects of a large accident similar to the Fukushima plant at Diablo Canyon. And of course, you have to look at the thousands and thousands of years of radioactive waste that's produced. You also have to, I believe, look very carefully at its potential for the spread of nuclear weapons. And that is one of the things that really bothered me. In after my assignment at Dresden, I was transferred to GE's San Jose facilities. I was manager of product service. And in 1975, I was made project manager of a reassessment of the containment of some 25 plants in the United States and of similar design to the Fukushima plant. In 1976, I resigned because of the concerns that I had with the whole program and formed a very small consulting company, which ended up doing consulting work for the California governor's office, both Democratic and Republican, the California PUC, and we did work for many states in the United States and foreign governments. I see that my time is about to run out, so I will just emphasize that I think Dan's presentation made the point that Monterey Bay needs to keep hands on their soul and not sell out for a few cents per month. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any member of the board have a question at this time? We have one more scheduled presenter that is going to be coming on to talk with us now. Who's that name? Who's next on the list to present? Is it Mr.
Bill Powers.
Bill Powers. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me, board?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. And I'm a consulting energy engineer in San Diego and also on the board of a local clean energy nonprofit named Protect Our Communities Foundation. I've also been involved in the development of community choice energy in San Diego over the last decade, and we now have a nascent community choice energy entity, San Diego Community Power. And that entity, for those of us that have been engaged for years, is to focus on local solar and local battery storage as their priority. We have also been a party in the PCIA exit fee proceeding at the California Public Utilities Commission that Mr. Habashi has mentioned. I agree with his assessment that this exit fee has gone from an annoyance to a 400-pound gorilla in the room in just a few years. As an expert witness for Protect Our Communities, we advocated against the inclusion of these older utility-owned generators like Diablo Canyon. Ultimately, Protect Our Communities was the only entity to take this challenge to appellate court. And our appeal will be considered by appellate court in San Diego in late June. And what we were asking is that the proposed decision by the judge at the PUC, which did not include Diablo Canyon or these other older generators, be the decision and remand this back to the commission to get this right and make it consistent with policy. At the commission, any commissioner, they have a quirky format where we have a proceeding for 1.5 years. Any commissioner that would like to float an alternate decision can do so. no matter how little they know about the proceeding. And if they get 3 votes, that's the decision. In this case, a commissioner with 2 months left on their term, who is now the senior VP of Regulatory Affairs at Southern California Edison, floated this decision, which included Diablo and all the other utility-owned generation. By my calculation, that's costing Monterey Bay Community Power at least $20 million a year to have Diablo Canyon exit fee in that portfolio. So one thing that has been important to this challenge is to get some CCAs to step up to the plate and support us. That happened yesterday. Cal CCA, the statewide coalition for CCAs, of which Monterey Bay Community Power is a member, informed us they would file a friend of the court or amicus brief in support of our appeal. And I want to separate out Monterey Bay and thank you as a member of that coalition for supporting us on that, because that will matter. Ultimately, our goal is you don't pay any exit fees for Diablo Canyon and any other older utility-owned generation in the portfolio. Finally, as my contribution in San Diego, I've written a roadmap to 100% local solar and battery storage build out for our community choice aggregator as they start developing their portfolio. That's intended to work not only here, but for any other CCA in the state. And I'd be happy to make it available to Monterey Bay Community Power. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your contribution to this. Are there any questions from the board for any of the presenters who followed Mr. Hirsch or for Mr. Hirsch at this point? I'm sure that we do.
A question.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Freeman. Is that right?
I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Powers, who just spoke. I am extremely interested in his lawsuit that would, as I understand it, basically drastically reduce or even possibly do away with the PCIA charge. And I'm wondering what he thinks his chances of prevailing in court is, and what else can we do up here to support him?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for that question. And I think our chances are possibly 1 in 3. The appellate court, we do not have a right of appeal. The court has to decide to take the appeal. They should take it. The Cal CCA amicus brief will help to increase the chances of that. The one tactical contribution that Monterey Bay Community Power could make is a separate amicus brief supporting this appeal. And finally, I think it's going to take a legislative effort to roll back the PCIA. It's really the utilities completely dominated that proceeding ultimately, and that's the reason these exit fees are overwhelming. The California Public Utilities Commission has generally been favorable to the utilities position consistently, and I think it's going to take a legislative effort to get a common sense and fair exit fee for the community choice aggregators.
Thank you for that answer. Straightforward. Yeah, this is just one more factor into this moving situation as we speak. I appreciate your presentation, Mr. Powers. Thank you, and for that information.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the board? Mr. Lee?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question to what Mr. Powers and Mr. Freeman were just asking is, do we have a time frame for that, for the result of the appeal?
The earliest the court will take it up, consider whether to take the appeal is the last week in June of this month. So any amicus that is submitted by June 22nd is timely. And at that point, it's up to the court to determine when they make their decision, but it's usually within a few months.
Okay, so it could be before the end of the calendar year if things progress as you anticipate.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the board? Do we have, how many comments do we have from the general public? Are there, I see 3 chats. Are there more than that, or do we have some folks who would like to make a comment from the general public? Can you hear me all right? About a dozen now. Okay, I would like to open that up for the general public to make comments. We have some. I would like to get to this. If you're going to raise a point that has already been raised, please just submit that in writing to us. We have several. If there is a comment that regarding this issue that has not on a factor that hasn't been mentioned, please let us know. But otherwise, we will take your written comments to say that I agree with whoever you agree with in some kind of a form. If you could write us that. We have received several comments and written comments. I think what we would do, I'd like to be really strict at sticking with a 2-minute limit for somebody if they want to, if anybody who does not want to speak, you can lower your hands on your computer. That would be great. But if there's others who are in line to speak, please feel free to do so. But I'm going to try to stick with your the 2-minute limit as much as I can. So I don't know if we could hear from the first person who would like to speak to us from the general public.
Sure. First up is Robert Perry.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll keep this real quick. I want to thank Professor Hirsch and the presenters for their contributions. I want to urge the board not to incorporate these attributes. I believe that decision is penny wise and pound foolish. You can't unbundle the attributes of this energy from a generation plant located smack in the middle of your service territory. I would ask the board members to think about how they would explain that to a layperson, how somehow the attributes of that energy don't apply to that plant. So also, as has been noted, the benefits, the projected benefits of accepting these attributes are diminishing. Meanwhile, the cost, the excess cost of operating Diablo Canyon continues to increase. It's projected to be $8 billion by the time that they are ultimately retired. Mr. Powers tagged it on the PCIA as $20 million a year. I'll take his word for it. California doesn't have the luxury to allow the continuing operation of Diablo Canyon. The money that we're spending to keep it afloat is not spent for the public benefit. It's spent for the benefit of the shareholders of PG&E. And I think the larger question is how could we use that money to invest in forward-looking projects, preferably with PG&E's involvement, that actually incentivize and does not present a barrier to renewable energy development. So again, I urge the board, don't take the crumbs being offered by PG&E. Go with your other CCAs in declining that and work hard to see how all this excess cost is really creating egregious PCIA costs that need to be resolved. So again, please, I urge you to not take the attributes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for staying in your 2-minute limit. Who's next?
Looks like Joan Carter, we're ready for you.
Ms. Carter, your mic may be muted.
Okay, let's go to the next person.
Jill Zemek, we're ready for you. Thank you.
Hi, you can hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm Jill Zamek, a resident of Arroyo Grande, and I had been excited by the prospect of joining Central Coast Community Energy in 2021 I have been an opponent of nuclear power and weapons since childhood. I'm a board member of San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace and have been working against the operation of dirty Diablo Canyon since construction. I was arrested at the Diablo Canyon blockade in 1981 and spent 6 nights in the makeshift jail in the gymnasium of California Men's Colony. I'm a committed anti-nuclear activist. So CCAs were created by and for people like me: clean energy, local control. Thus, I was deeply troubled to learn that our local CCA had made the decision to accept nuclear attributes, allocation, energy, whatever words you use to describe it. Regardless, even the appearance of associating dirty nuclear with a CCA is incompatible. And when nuclear appears on CCE's content label, that demonstrates a serious trespass. I want this CCA to thrive, so I invite you to revisit your March 4th decision, which betrays your promise to your customers, your allies, and your stated mission. At the very least, choose to reject the nuclear CFAs and maintain CCCE's 100% carbon-free commitment for 2020. This will have minimal financial impact, at 6 months saving only $1.5 million, but costing a great deal more in a tarnished reputation, current customers, and potential customers. We can all agree that the unreasonable, ever-increasing, and perhaps unlawful PCIA fees is the greatest culprit in the financial woes of CCAs. I urge CCCE to join the challenge to PCIA fees through Protect Our Communities Foundation in the State Appellate Court in San Diego. Thank you for your time and consideration. I appreciate the opportunity to voice my thoughts.
Thank you for your participation. Appreciate it. Just go ahead to the next one without me asking.
Dora Shui, we're ready for you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is obviously Dora Shui, and I have done paralegal research for the California Public Utility Commission hearings. My family and I live in Santa Cruz County, and these comments are different from ones I submitted before based on a further look at the meeting agenda packet. My family urges the policy board to take option number 2, rejecting the nuclear CFAs and suspending the 100% carbon-free commitment until 2025 or earlier, if as CEO Habashi says it can be met by then. And this is the honest approach, and it's also the most cost-effective approach. Regarding the claim of Mbcp that they are only taking attributes of the nuclear energy, I am quoting from Appendix P in the meeting agenda packet, and this was on page 401 of the 433-page agenda packet. Appendix P describes the standards and criteria for Pacific Gas and Electric Company's management and sales of energy from large hydroelectric or nuclear resources from PG&E's portfolio, which they call carbon-free energy. Appendix P will guide PG&E's actions with respect to sales of carbon-free energy generated in calendar years 2019 and 2020. No mention of the attributes here. And then B is overview of carbon-free energy. And it provides a description of the processes and activities for PG&E's intended sales of carbon-free energy generated in calendar years 2019 and 2020. And so the allocation amount is one of those processes, and it's defined as the amount of carbon-free energy generated from facilities corresponding to each eligible LSE's allocation ratio. And the LSE is the load serving entity. Mbcp fits that definition because that a load serving entity is defined on page 402 as something that, as an entity that has the forecasted load identified for the calendar year in which the allocation amount is accepted, and that serves customers who pay the PCIA departing load charges. I'm sorry I've gone over my time, but I just wanted to make these points that definitely talking about sales, and also to urge you to support the Protect Our Communities suit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please vote option 2.
Benjamin Eichert, we're ready for you. Thank you.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Chair McPherson, members of the board, thank you so much for organizing this special meeting to give active and engaged members of the community an opportunity to weigh in on this issue. I also want to express my thanks to the members of the other boards and the staff of MBCP for so capably launching our agency and getting us to this point. What I would like to do is focus in for just a moment on procedural issues. For me, one of my biggest concerns about this entire issue is the process. I think it was briefly mentioned that the issue appears first to have been brought before the Community Advisory Council at the end of February, and the agenda for that meeting listed the item as a discussion item only and did not indicate in any way that attributes might be coming from Diablo Canyon. It was only 1 week later that the issue was brought to the policy board. The point I'm trying to make is that for a decision of this kind, which for many seems to go against some of the founding promises for this agency, we really think it would have been much better for there to be more than just a week when there was even the possibility for community engagement. That this item would have been more clearly put on the agendas, that the Community Advisory Council would have actually been asked to render a decision rather than just discuss the item, and that much more time would have been given for community input and engagement. So with that, I would like to make a recommendation. I would like to ask MBCP to work on formalizing a relationship with community-based organizations throughout the Central Coast. We are already engaged. We have deep roots into the community. We interact with and support members of the community who are customers of this organization. And if we partner in a more formal way, we can help the agency conduct some of that deep and meaningful community engagement that I think was really missing around this issue. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. I think we're going to be doing some of that, more of that with our Community Advisory Council in the future. Who's the next speaker?
David Wiseman, we're ready for you. You might be muted, David.
David Wiseman, you're muted. Go to the next person.
Linda Seeley, we're ready for you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm really grateful that your board called this special meeting. I'm a member of San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace board. And the reason that we clamored for this meeting was because we understand we really do, the mood of the municipalities around Diablo Canyon. And we want you to succeed. We understand how dirty nuclear power is. You do too, I know. And when we learned about MBCP's decision to accept the attributes of nuclear power without letting our community know about it so that we could give input into the decision, we were very disheartened and we got suspicious about the underlying motives of MBCP, because we thought that this CA was created to bring renewable, clean energy to the Central Coast as an alternative to PG&E. And what it appears to us is that your motivation is only about the perceived bottom line. And I might add that that perceived bottom line seems to be a very muddy one. When I was listening to Mr. Habashi today, trying to explain, I don't know, I'm not an energy expert, but I couldn't really understand what he was saying. And I don't, maybe you could, but I certainly couldn't. And remember, 7 CCAs have rejected this. Some of them decided that they were going to take the carbon-free attributes of large hydro and reject the nuclear attributes. You could choose to do that. But I want to tell you that if you want the loyalty and trust of the people of this county, you need to reconsider this decision to take the nuclear attributes. It's really not worth all the I think, small monetary savings that you'll make if it costs you the support of your potential customer base.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, we're going to be losing a couple directors about 3:30, so I want to get a few more comments from I don't want to cut the public off at any time, but some of this has been repetitious, but if anybody has anything new to state that hasn't been stated already from the general public, I'd like to get it back to the board for discussion as soon as possible, because I think we're going to lose some directors about 3:30. Who is next?
June Cochran, it's your turn.
We have 15 hands that are still up, so that's, I think we're going to just be able to go for public comment for another 10 minutes or so, and then I'd like to bring it back to the board for discussion, and hopefully we can come to some kind of a decision. But go ahead, June Cochran.
My colleagues and I have worked over a decade to bring community choice program to San Luis Obispo. Unfortunately, because of the PCIA, we couldn't start our own, so we had the options of waiting or joining Monterey Bay. After conversations with you, we trusted you to make our dream a reality. I sat next to you and spoke at multiple meetings in San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties, urging them to join you because we trusted your vision. As you know, I specifically asked 2 of you on staff who accompanied me to those meetings if nuclear was ever going to be in the energy mix, and I was assured that it would not. The policy members need to follow that assurance with action today and not betray our trust. What's next, Cole? The current estimate of savings has gone down 75%, and that's insignificant and definitely not worth the lack of integrity. If you want money for projects, I can help you with grants or have impressive event with silent auction actions. The community choice programs who have rejected this nuclear deal because they want to stay true to their values is more than double the number who are accepting it. And those accepting it are being labeled as puppets for PG&E or many PG&E entities. Which group do you really want to join? Keep your reputation intact, keep your sense of pride in your energy mix, and most importantly, keep your community working with you to make our collective energy future truly clean, local, and resilient. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Chair Byron, we're ready for you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Chair McPherson, policy board members. Although I'm the chair of the Monterey Bay Community Power Community Advisory Council and a former California Energy Commissioner who was very much involved in approving content labels for all energy producers in the state, I am making my recommendation on this agenda item as a customer of Monterey Bay. I empathize with the residents of San Luis Obispo County who are against nuclear power and the Diablo Canyon power plant operating in their county. They are also new and valued customers of Monterey Bay, which I understand we should now refer to as Central Coast Energy, Central Coast Community Energy, as a result of their joining us. And I understand that many of them, for perhaps as long as 50 years since Diablo Canyon power plant was proposed and forced upon the community by a now twice bankrupt and arrogant investor-owned utility, they've been against anything to do with nuclear power. I share many of their concerns. However, as long as the battle for or against nuclear power has been going on, I do not believe that is the issue before you today. The decision you made in March and the same issue you are reconsidering is about equity, fairness, and making a hard choice. Equity in not having to pay twice for the GHG-free attributes of the electricity already delivered to CCCE customers. fairness in that CCCE is not responsible for anything to do with PG&E's Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. And making a hard choice is about not denying CCCE the credit for having done such an excellent job in meeting one of its key goals, to reduce greenhouse gases. Regardless of your decision today, electricity from this nuclear power plant will continue to flow on the grid. Diablo Canyon will still be shut down on schedule, and after it is shuttered, CCCE will still purchase additional new GHG-free electricity. So I ask, why should CCCE's community set goals and programs be unnecessarily delayed or financially impacted? A statement against nuclear power should not necessitate financial harm to the CCCE and the community it serves. I recommend that you allow your March 4th decision to stand. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker.
Eric VM, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Chair and Board. I'll be brief as possible. I want to remind your board that what's being proposed is actually a 6-month deal, and that the ask that was made by the mothers is essentially to decline this 6-month deal and to maintain the carbon-free attributes and to engage in a meaningful conversation with community stakeholders in order to really understand the short and midterm financial implications from the PCIA and other related issues, and to come to a consensus where we can come back to your board with support from the broader community, having worked very closely with staff to understand all of the issues, and having had a transparent and meaningful conversation. So I want to encourage your board to adopt that alternate option number 3, to revisit this issue after 6 months, and maintaining the status quo. Thank you so much.
Sierra Club Rep. Kershaw Durham, we're ready for you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So thanks for allowing stakeholders to speak. I'm speaking for the Sierra Club, which you may know has 3.8 million members, and our chapter alone has over 6,000 in Santa Cruz and Monterey. And we submitted a letter yesterday. I think Professor Hirsch summarized the cogent points, so I won't repeat. But we just urge you to reverse this decision, recommit to using clean energy. And it isn't worth 50 cents a month to lose all your stakeholders' trust or lose your reputation or the loyalty of these members. The nuclear power policy for the Sierra Club is the same as Mr. Hirsch says. We do not support nuclear energy. We support closures of plants. You've already said that. But we just know that the high level of radioactive waste, that we need to stop the use and curtail the plants. And there's an urgency for this. So closing the risky plants, and just, we're asking you to please reverse your decision and explain, or at least explain to ratepayers that you've had a change in your energy policy. But we don't think it's worth the 50 cents a month. It's not financially feasible. So thank you for letting us speak. And that was for the Sierra Club. It's an environmental group that has no corporate interests. We're grassroots. Thank you.
Next up is from the number 408-332-5375.
Hello, my name is Ron Swenson, Swenson Solar. I've talked to Tom in the past about our willingness to provide additional solar power within the district. To Justin on the board, I comment that I've got the largest installations of solar in Santa Cruz County, and I have never been asked by the staff in any way to expand the systems that we could make available, but I'd be happy to explore ways that we can use additional solar right in the community, and we don't have to use the hocus pocus of intermediate credits and so forth. We can put real solar in our real community. As for the issue of intermittence, I think we could take up the idea of acquiring the rights to the silent country cousin of the nuclear power plant, Diablo, which is Helms Pumping Station. The fact is that Diablo Canyon would not work without the extreme amount of storage, hydro storage that's provided in that Helms station in the nighttime. We could turn that into a daytime storage and substantially reduce the intermittency of solar and the duck curve, for those who know what that is, by doing this. And furthermore, if we take on this role of accepting nuclear power, we would have zero standing to be avoiding the decommissioning costs of the nuclear power plant. If we divorce ourselves from that completely when it's shut down, we would at least have standing to say we never used it, therefore we should never pay for that decommissioning, which is going to be a horrific cost in the years to come. So those 3 points: decommissioning, stand aside; use Helms, not Diablo; and more solar. I'm ready, willing, and able to provide additional solar through a public-private partnership, both with you, Tom, and with you, Justin, and anybody else in the community that would like to see additional solar brought to the front line here in our community.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll have one more speaker from the public, and then I want to bring it back to the board.
Brett Garrett, we're ready for you.
Good afternoon. I'm Brett Garrett from Santa Cruz. MBCP is changing to Central Coast Community Energy. New name, new logo, and a new reputation that depends on making the clean energy decisions that inspire the trust of the community. I advocate option 4, reject the nuclear attributes and remain carbon-free. Can we afford option 4? I say yes. Think about the rebates and discounts that you offer. I think if you go from 7% back to 5%, the extra 2% would cover the cost of option 4 without dipping into the rate stabilization fund. As for option 1, the nuclear attributes, I think this has basically the same effect as if you purchased nuclear power from PG&E. I've had so many arguments with myself about whether attributes are the same as buying nuclear, but it seems to be the same thing for all intents and purposes. The power content label shows nuclear. Anti-nuclear folks like myself are not happy. Your champions and potential champions are the very same people who read the power content labels to make sure the energy is clean. So please don't expect Central Coast Community Energy supporters to have to spend the next 5 years trying to justify why nuclear is on the power content label. And I do have something to say about options 2 and 3. If you're choosing options 2 and 3, you have to specify what percentage of energy will be carbon-free. The fiscal impact depends on the percentage. If 95% is carbon-free, what are the numbers? If 90% is carbon-free, what are the numbers? I don't know what percentage was assumed in the table in the staff report. So for me personally, nuclear is the worst. So I'm a strong no to option 1. And I say yes to option 4, 100% carbon-free energy. Please reject the nuclear attributes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, I've lost my video, but that shouldn't bother anybody. I would like to bring it back to the board at this point because I want to have input. I don't want to lose anybody before 3:30, and we've got about 20 minutes. As chair, I can't make a motion, but and I sure don't want to suspend our carbon-free commitment. We're one of 3 to make that commitment. I'm looking at this to see what we might do. And as I said, I can't make a motion. I want to hear what others have to say. But you know, the option 4 with additional direction from the staff to come back to the board in next year with a report on the cost of any procurement challenges before the board makes a decision regarding these attributes for the next year. That's just my take on it, but I would welcome anybody. Please, who would like to speak? Heidi Harman from San Luis Obispo.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Chair McPherson. Thank you again for agendizing this special meeting. I'd like to make a motion to modify slightly option number 3, reject nuclear and maintain carbon-free until 2021. And in the meantime, be able to build some of these relationships and continue this conversation and do more outreach around this issue until we can better understand the details and the numbers as has been mentioned.
Okay, that's similar. Yeah, it really is similar to my point. My point, I think, too. Who else would like to? Was that a motion?
Yes,
and that was a second by Mr. Dillis. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. We'll comment on the issue, the motion. Mr. McShane, I think you were first. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm supporting motion or the option 4. So I guess it would help to seek clarification a little bit, because it sounded like Director Harman was amending or adjusting slightly option 3.
Yes, well, I think my community, as has been made clear, and myself, are not interested in having nuclear be included whatsoever. And so if there's consensus to move forward on that now, I think there's some concern that maybe we're not 100% clear about the implications, but I'm 100% willing to move forward on no nuclear to be included whatsoever.
So I think, so the confusion is that option 3 says suspend our 100% carbon free, but revisit next year. Option 4 says no nuclear and maintain 100% carbon free. And so that's where people are getting confused, because they want option 4, but maybe with the proviso that we revisit next year, because we don't know what the cost is going to be next year. So either way, Mr. McShane, what Mayor Harman is proposing is essentially option 4 with the revisit next year, if I can put it that way. So
thank you, Jane. Yes, I'm happy to move option 4.
I think that's pretty much what I would go ahead, but I appreciate your motion. Or I don't know if you want to rephrase it at this point. I think it'd be good to clarify that.
Yes, Chair. It just for clarity, Director Harman, if you can restate the motion as you would like to amend it, and then Mr. Dillis, if you could weigh in on whether you still want to second the rephrased motion.
Okay, thank you for that opportunity and that clarification. I would like to make a motion to support option number 4.
I'll second that. This is Director Hoffa.
Okay.
Withdraw my second to the first, if that makes a difference.
Well, because I'm sorry, Director Hoffa, because Director Dillis seconded the first, I'm pretty sure he's fine with the motion as stated. I just want to make sure as the seconder of the pending motion that he's okay with the restated motion.
No, I'm not. And I apparently misunderstood Dr. Harman's initial motion. So no, I would prefer not to second that motion.
Okay, so straight up, Director Harman, you wanted to, your motion is to reject nuclear CFAs and maintain Monterey Bay Community Power's 100% carbon-free commitment?
Yes, sir.
Without any direction to come back and let us know what the real cost impact is going to be. I mean, that's what was in number 3, I think.
Yeah, I think that's why I thought number 3 was better. I mean, we have to know the numbers exactly. That's my feeling.
Okay, so that's what I was saying originally, essentially. Yeah, so you and I have been going a little bit back and forth.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think our intention is the same.
I would second your motion then, or if it hasn't been.
So, okay. So then maybe the attorney can help with the language. It sounds like, at least initially here in the motion carriers, that we want no nuclear ever, essentially, maintain carbon free and revisit in 2021.
Which is
that's what I gathered.
And it sounds like there is a second for that motion.
Yeah, let me be clear. So
For clarity, Director Harman, when you said no nuclear ever and revisit, I'm understanding your motion to be option number 3, rejecting the nuclear allocations, maintaining the 100% carbon free, and revisit the issue in 6 months.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I second that if there isn't a second.
Can I weigh in for a second? Because I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Cummings.
Yeah, so it's what I'm hearing, and maybe we can get the motion repeated, but if it's option number 3, it's
2%.
There's a rejection of the nuclear. However, what option 3 says is that we're suspending the 100% carbon-free commitment, which is different from 4, which is maintaining the carbon-free commitment. So, it's unclear to me what direction we're headed in, whether we're rejecting the carbon-free commitment, rejecting the nuclear CFAs and maintaining the commitment for 2020 and revisiting next year, or if we're rejecting the nuclear CFAs and suspending the 100% carbon-free commitment for 2020. So it'd be good to get some clarity.
The motion, as clarified by Director Harman, is to reject the carbon-free allocation derived from nuclear generation, maintain 100% carbon-free commitment, and to revisit the issue in 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
Right. I have a couple in line. Director Williams, go ahead. From Santa Barbara, you're mute. I think you're muted. Is Director Williams on?
Your mute button, Director Williams, may be on your headset. No.
Guess I will call in.
No, we can hear you now.
You can hear you.
So, I want to speak in opposition to the motion. I'm very disappointed that there has been no factual refutation to the point made by the executive director that the taking of the attributes will not actually change by 1 whit the amount of electrons from nuclear that we have locally, nor our procurement, and will not affect the demand for nuclear, will not affect when Diablo closes. And I will tell you, because I was in the legislature at the time, the very reason why the PCIA has grown is because of the criticism leveled at CCAs that they consistently are willing to value symbolism over actual renewable energy. And this is this weakens our movement terribly, because what many CCAs have done, and the reason why we joined Monterey Bay Community Power, because you've done a whole lot less of it, is to engage in practices such as purchases of unbundled RECs or other mechanisms that make dirty electrons seem clean to the public. And the reason why we joined is because you were making efforts to actually procure real renewable energy. And I view not so much in the next 6 months, but the fact that what this will lead to is a rejection of the attributes forever, as has been mentioned, which will cost us millions more that will not go to procurement or building of renewable energy. And it fits the pattern, unfortunately, of CCAs across the state of continuing to value symbolism over reality. And the irony that we will pay for this and therefore have a dirtier energy mix in what we procure. There is, I will say that I have the utmost respect for Mothers Against Peace and their advocacy over the years. They will either be amused or horrified to know that I am a child of their movement. My first political act was the Stop Uranium Now Son, which is a contemporary of the Abalone Alliance, which the old timers know about. Afloat as a toddler, and I've grown up in the anti-nuclear movement. I am no friend of nuclear, but what I do think is there is a moral imperative for substance over symbolism, and this is paying a lot of money for a piece of paper that actually doesn't change anything, and will, unless this board is going to be willing to spend a whole lot more on renewables, will actually lead to us having less renewables than we otherwise would have money for. And that's very disappointing.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman Gomez.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple comments that have come out of here that I want to make sure that we bring into this. Equity for all. One of the mottos that we do have is the affordability, and we have a large population of people with poverty rates and whatnot, and the impact this is going to have is going to be over everybody, not just a select group of people. And we need to be thinking about the holistic approach of what this credit or this attribute means. And I know that there are a lot more people with better expertise than what I have, but just by the common sense and the comments that I've been hearing and what I've been learning, even our Community Advisory Council chair, who has a lot more depth of knowledge, who was able to assess and assimilate all of the materials and the content we had to vote on, supports us maintaining what we did have. The only flexibility that I see that I'd be willing to do is to do the suspense on the temporary and reduce the number from 100%, because we have consumers here that we need to be thinking about, especially when it's equity for all and the affordability. And we understand we don't like the nuclear. We know it's going away. This is the attribute that's going in the bucket of electricity, and you can't tell one chemical to the other that's in that bucket when the electricity goes through the system here. So it's a principle statement that I'm hearing that we are asking the board to take, but I am also a representative of an area of poverty, and for me to tell my consumers and my constituents that we are going to go for a higher bill when they've had me represent them to make sure that our CCA is representing them to make it as cost efficient as possible, that would be going against my representation. Therefore, I want to make sure that if we're going to do anything, I need to do any type of fiscal analysis, that we provide the opportunity for staff to do so. Going back and forth on this particular motion, 100% renewable would be exponential for a lot of the consumers. We have 300,000 consumers that this is the impacting. And we at one point had a selection that if you wanted to do 100% renewable, you could pay the premium price for that. And maybe that's something in the future that we would reinstate, so that if people are really adamant about that particular platform, that they can assess or evaluate that as their choice option, that the attributes won't be part of their billing invoice essentially. So I would be okay with the holding this back until I know the fiscal analysis for all of the consumers. And so those are the notes I have here in terms of my comments anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Lee, Director Lee, did you have a comment? No. Any other director have a comment?
Yes, Chair?
Yes, Mr. Dillis, and I'm just watching the screen that I'm back on now. So okay.
I'll try to be brief. Well, I voted in March to accept the nuclear attributes, not because I'm a fan of nuclear, I'm not, but because I understood it to be no incremental damage to our environment at the time, because it was going to produce energy anyway, and I did like the savings, the dollar savings that came with that. But now, listening to all of our community members, I'm seeing that we may be causing some damage to the reputation of Mbcp, because it appears we're not being true to our mission for clean energy and local control, and thereby potentially we might lose trust, customers, and potential new customers. I care about that. Also, maybe we're supporting the larger nuclear industry. which I don't want to do. When the public can look at the label and see 20% nuclear, I'm not sure that's where I want to be, but I still want to achieve the savings. That's why I'm not in favor of, if we don't accept nuclear, not in favor of keeping it the threshold at 100% carbon free. I would like to see that. I know Mr. Hibachi and the staff report indicated we would get it up to that level in 2025 anyway. I would be willing to go down to something that would maybe break even for us. And I think I heard Mr. Hibachi say earlier, it might be the 75 to 80% level. So those are my comments.
Okay, I have in line now Director Cummings, Freeman, and Parker, and then Velasquez, I think. Is that the lineup? Okay, good. Mr. Cummings, Director Cummings.
Great, thank you. Just to kind of follow up on that, I think it's really important, and the public brought it up, where we are committed to a brand that is really trying to get to 100% carbon free. But I think our ratepayers will understand that that's going to take some time. And I wanted to include a question in this for Mr. Hibachi, which is, since the inception of Monterey Bay Community Power, how have we always been, because I'm coming in as a newcomer, but have we always been 100% carbon free? And how is that ratio between carbon free power versus clean forms of energy? How has that kind of changed over time?
From a contractual standpoint, in the last 2 years, I believe we've been a little over 100%, actually 102, 103%. As I mentioned earlier, we buy the power in pieces. The energy is bought separately from the carbon-free attributes, and therefore, when we bought the carbon-free attributes, we thought that our forecast of demand is going to be so much. And at the end of the year, we found that our demand was less. Effectively, we were, for the first couple of years, long and bought more than what we needed. But again, that's contractually speaking. Realistically and actually, that's an entirely different story. And just to be clear, since we have talked about facts versus fiction, pretty much the Central Coast gets a very good chunk of its electricity from Diablo Canyon, because that's still the electricity travels in the path of least resistance.
Thank you. Well, I'd just say that similar to what Director Dill has said, is that I think that we are committed to getting towards 100% carbon free, and there are going to be years where we fluctuate as we have more people join into the power grid. So I definitely understand that the nuclear option would save us money, but I think that it could erode our brand, and branding is really important right now. So if there's a ratio or balance between what's carbon free versus some forms of carbon, so that we can continue towards our commitment to being 100% carbon free, I think that might be something that the community could live with, rather than staying carbon free and then buying into nuclear as an option. I just think that the optics of that, it would be very detrimental to the Monterey Bay Community Power brand.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Freeman, Director Freeman.
Yes, I just wanted to remind people that at the last meeting we had at the first week of March, I and Director Williams made a proposal that to kind of counter the nuclear side effects, if you will, that all the savings of the money go into local energy projects. And that was my way of, I guess, somewhat rationalizing it, because I too, like I think most of the other members of the board are, I'm fairly anti-nuclear. I don't want nuclear power in our mix if we can avoid it at all costs. So I think if we just do it for the 6 months of this year, and then revisit the entire issue, and maybe at that time the attributes that PG&E is offering will change. Maybe they'll just be offering their hydro or at a better price, or we have more contracts in our bucket of power that we purchase on the open market that can overcome this. things change in 6 months. We've seen drastic changes certainly in the first 6 months of this year. So most of which have nothing to do with Monterey Bay Community Power, but
thank God.
That's it. I would vote for the 6 month extension and go with it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Parker, Director Parker.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion, and I agree with many of the points, and I'm supportive of the motion. You know, when we discussed this in March, I'm not sure that any of the policy board members were completely comfortable with accepting the nuclear attributes. At that time, it looked like the financial hit was significant. What has changed now is that it looks like the financial impact, at least for the 6 months of this year, are much less. So that's one of the reasons I'm comfortable, because I think that the hit to you know, our customers will be not something that will be detrimental. And so, but I do think it's going to be important to come back in 6 months. These attribute things, you know, get looked at on an annual basis, from what I understand. And you know, the costs came down from where we thought they were, and they may continue to do that. They may not. So I think when we come back in 6 months, if staff could really present to us what is known about what the costs of those attributes are going to be in the coming year, what that might mean if the impact to our customers is going to be too great, what that might mean in terms of a percentage of less than 100% carbon free might help us. But I would really hate to go that way too. I mean, we really made that strong commitment, and I think it's important to stick with that. I would just say that you know, I would be interested if my colleagues agree that we look to join or add an amicus brief to the lawsuit in San Diego. We need to get to the heart of the matter and get these utility-owned generation costs out of the PCIA. So I think we should do an amicus brief. We should also explore sponsoring or supporting legislation that would clarify that those costs were never intended by the original legislation to be in the PCIA.
Can I just interrupt you just for a second? I might ask Mr. Shaw, could we take any kind of action in that regard?
Chair, thank you. No, we could not take action today to do so, but I think what Ms. Parker is asking is not to take action, but for staff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think this is just commentary. Right. It's not trying to change the motion or anything. Thank you, though, for that clarification. And the other thing that I think we want to look at is part of the reason we're here today is because the degree to which we engaged the community was insufficient. And now, you know, people are very worried about things. So I think as we look at the new format for, or, you know, our new bylaws for the Community Advisory Committee, we should look at the recommendations that came to us about ways to do more effective community outreach. We should look at those recommendations as part of that ongoing conversation. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. And I know that the CAC, we do want to have further outreach, more outreach to the community. Ms. Velasquez, that's the only hand I see still remaining to ask a question. Oh, Mr. Lee followed Ms. Velasquez.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also wanted just to weigh in on this conversation. And I know when we voted in March, my understanding was that there was going to be no incremental damage to our commitment to clean energy, and also no increase in the fiscal impacts to our residents. So just for me, I am in agreement with the sentiments of Director Kaufman in regards to equity for all and affordability, when the city, at least that I represent, which is disadvantaged residents and underrepresented, one of the reasons why we joined was also for that affordability to our residents. So I want to make sure that as we continue, that we also, you know, I'm okay with the 6 months revisiting, but also to be able to look at the attributes and perform a cost analysis to make sure that we understand what the fiscal impacts are to all of our customers, all of our residents, especially my commitment, as I said, to my constituents and to my residents of making sure that the option that we agreed upon that was for the affordability. Also, I do agree also on the community engagement as we move forward for there to be a platform where there's sufficient community engagement, productive community engagement, but also that we have equity and that all portions of our county that are part of this, the CCA are also part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Bashi wanted, did you have a response?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
Mr. Lee, or Director Lee?
Yeah, sure. I just want to offer a quick clarification. If we go with the other option 3 as modified or number 4, that would require that we go out there and try to find somewhere around 220 gigawatt hours of large hydro, and I'm not certain that I can find it. And if I do find it, I'm not certain that the price of it is going to be $3.50. So if you do make that decision tonight, do it with the understanding that we will pay any price in order to get to 100% carbon free. Because as it stands, we are 8% short on our carbon free position. Second is for next year, I think I've heard a lot that will come back in 6 months and tell us what the picture looks like. By then, it's a little late sometimes to go into the operating year, then start to look for carbon-free attributes coming from large hydro. Generally, you try to lock that a year and a half ahead of time, and we haven't. We have a very large short position for next year. I don't want to wait until December to hear again that we need to go to 100% carbon-free for 2021. If you want to make the decision tonight, please do. If you want to hold off on making it and have me come back in September with some sort of a refined analysis as to what the cost of going to 100% carbon-free, that would be my preference. This way I can go a little earlier and lock in whatever position that we need to lock in order to meet your goals.
Yeah, this is really confusing economics, no question about it, how we manage our power. Mr. Lee, would you
just a kind of a quick summary. I am going to be supportive of the motion, but I do appreciate Mr. Hibashi's commentary on the economics of the situation and realizing that economics 6 months from now could be vastly different than we see currently. And I do have faith in staff that they will provide the best deal and the best way forward for the organization when it comes to that. So I think one of the just reminders that I was trying to bring forward through my own brain was waiting the 6 months is going to allow for the PCIA hopefully appeal to be addressed, and that we may have more clarity on those exit fees as well. And so perhaps in a near term, maintaining the proposal, but then also adding the economic component that Mr. Hibashi is saying is, what does this mean for us? What does it mean to our bottom line? Which then we can make the decision on the equity versus the 100% carbon-free commitment. So that's just what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there's any other questions from the board. Does anybody else have their hand raised? I just want to say, oh, Mr. McShane, I just want to say thank you everyone for your input. I mean, it's really been straightforward, and there's differences of opinion, but that's what we're all about. But I think we're going to move on to something here pretty soon. But Mr. McShane, go ahead.
Yeah, very quick. So just again, back to Mr. Hibashi's comments, you're looking at option 3 or option 4. I just want to make sure I understood that Mr. Hibashi appreciates the option to come back, with the 6 months and the analysis, right? Is that what I understood, Tom?
I think probably it would be best to rephrase the motion. That would be really helpful.
Okay, I just
I think it'd be valuable for Monterey Bay Community Power or Central Coast Community Energy. I hope we're going to be there in a couple months. But I think it would be good that we do have an update that's included in the motion. If it's not, I'm a little confused myself right now. So I think it'd be really important to have that part of the motion to review this. The first part of 2021, as I had said, I think earlier on, in fact. But
I think that's it, right?
Happy to amend the motion.
That's the way I understand it. Is that? But it didn't seem like that was
right. I mean, I think the language around 2021 it was implying that, but wasn't maybe implicitly stated there. So thank you.
Okay, so. Mr. Shaw, do we have, can you state the motion, or I don't know if Ms. Harman would like to do that, but I just want to make sure we all know what we're going to be voting on here.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll defer to Director Harman, but I think what Tom is asking for is the ability to plan. So if the direction is to maintain the carbon-free commitment for 2020 and also for 2021, he'd be happy to come back in 6 months, but he would want the direction now to be at 100% for 2021 so that he can plan in advance. Mr. Havashi, am I catching that correctly?
I think so. I mean, we can come back in September during the annual meeting and revisit, because effectively, in order to budget for next year, we will have to be clear about how much it's going to cost us to line up the resources that we need to line up. And we will have to make an assumption then whether we're going to continue with 100% carbon free and no nuclear allocation, or we will continue with the no nuclear allocation, but we will settle for something less than 100% carbon free. I think if you can state that for what you want for 2021 for fiscal year, so we don't just spin wheels and doing the budget and eventually get it wrong, that would be really helpful.
Okay, so maybe perhaps the attorney or perhaps Chair McPherson can help me with the language. We're going with a modification of option 3, which is to reject the nuclear and maintain carbon free until 2021, at which time we will review. I'm not sure what that next piece is.
Would that be to review our ability to reach 100% carbon free on a financial basis, or
yes,
something of that nature? That
Mr. Chairman, I can tell you right now, next year we will have to pull money out of the rate stabilization fund just to be a par with PG&E. So if that's the answer that you're looking for, whether we financially can afford to continue with 100% carbon free, I can tell you right now that that is not going to happen. But if you ask for, give you a financial assessment for 2021, with and without the additional carbon-free attributes, I certainly can do that.
I think that's what Director Harman, how does that sound, Director Harman?
That sounds great, although I will not be able to repeat that accurately. So.
May I try to, let me take a shot at it, Director Harman. I think what you're asking for is, for the remainder of 2020, you don't want us to take the carbon-free attributes associated with nuclear generation, and you also would like us to maintain at 100% carbon-free. Would that be
correct?
Motion? I think that should be sufficient. I'll figure out a way to work it eventually in during the budget time. We'll show 2 sets of numbers, one with and without taking the carbon-free attributes.
Great.
I'm sorry, not even the carbon-free attributes, just buy in the additional carbon-free attributes from large hydro, not from nuclear.
Okay, I think Director Kaufman Gomez has a question.
Yes, we still need to be able to offer the flexibility of the 100% versus a little bit more that Tom has the ability for. Because again, we're still going back to our consumers and saying it's all now at 100% when we are ramping up that way based on what we're procuring. And the ability to procure it instantly may then really spike the bills for a lot of the consumers that we're looking at in terms of equity for all and the affordability. So I need to make sure that we still have some flexibility in there, that it isn't 100% on that mark, but to show us the scalability of getting there. I think 2025 we will be there, but in 21, if we're going to go right out the chute doing that, I think that our consumers and a lot of our underrepresented communities are going to see quite a spike in their utility bills overall. And the fact that we're going to be going back and getting into the rate stabilization fund, which are from the consumers that have had the Monterey Bay Community Power for all of this time. We're using money that we've saved up for those consumers for this instantly now. And that's money that's taking my savings as an example for this point forward, when I would think that savings should be, all of the consumers. And so I need to know that we're giving some flexibility to Tom on the procurement. 100%, while it's an achievable goal for us to fiscally go there and tell him that's exactly what we want, it's not giving that opportunity for a lot of our residents that are looking for the affordability side of things without having to dip into the reserves.
And I think if I could speak to this, I think the staff has heard the discussion. They see which way we want to go. They are going to bring us the analysis at our next policy board meeting to let us, look at the implications and make a decision about the future year's budget. At least that's what I heard from Mr. Hibashi. Did I get that right? That you were going to find a way to bring us the information. You see which way we want to go, and then you're going to give us the information about what that might mean from a financial standpoint at our next meeting.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so could we vote?
I have a point of clarification. I just wanted to clarify that we are rejecting nuclear period from here on out in this motion.
I don't think we have all of the numbers yet on this.
Okay.
Director Harman, the original motion, and I realize we've had some discussion since then, the original motion was rejecting the 2020 allocation and maintaining 100% carbon free and coming back in 6 months. The discussion since then has been to reject the 2020 nuclear allocation, to maintain the 100% carbon free commitment for 2020, and to come back at the policy board in September for additional financial information. Although it is still your motion, so if that is going to be amended, that would be the motion as I would couch it, but it's still your motion to amend.
No, I hear you. Motion stands as is.
Okay, and that's okay. The second, I would assume, I hope. Okay.
Chair, if I understand Director Harman, she's saying she does not want to amend the motion. She wants to maintain 100% carbon free for 2020, maintain the 2020 100%, or to reject the nuclear allocation for 2020, maintain 100% 2020, and to come back not at the September board meeting, but in 6 months.
6 months, yeah. We might have another special meeting on this, I think. But everybody clear on the motion, and does anybody else have any other questions now? Okay, please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Director Kaufman-Gomez?
Yes.
Cummings?
Aye.
Dillis?
No.
Freeman?
Yes.
Ilio's absent. Hoffa?
Yes.
Harman?
Yes.
Julian's absent. Lee?
Yes.
Oglesby?
Aye.
Parker?
Aye.
Patino?
No.
Nomura?
Aye.
Velasquez,
Aye.
Williams,
No.
Vice Chair McShane,
Yes.
Chair McPherson.
Aye.
Give me one moment, I'll just give you the total. So I have 12 ayes, 3 noes, and 2 absent. The motion carries.
12-3, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for a very energized discussion, and for the members of the public and those who participated in the hearing. Thank you. I was hoping we'd get done by 3, but we're before 4, so we're not so bad. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. This meeting is adjourned.
Stay well.